Why not join me as a warrior of the sun, righteous knights, guardians of all that is good, in the name of the Lord of Sunlight? Oh, magnificent! I knew you would fancy it. Now, just say a prayer at the altar of sunlight. Then you shall know the brilliance of our sun.
Hey there, my name is Alex, I am the Silver Mont, and in this video we'll be talking Dark Souls lore. Specifically, we'll be looking at a character who has existed since the inception of Dark Souls. A character who has maintained a presence throughout the trilogy, and yet was only revealed at the end of the last game as a hidden boss. At least, that is if you believe he is who many believe him to be. It is of course Gwyn's Firstborn, the Nameless God of War. He who inherited the sunlight and was struck from the annals. The Nameless King. Typically I would start these character studies by studying their name, but of course, the Nameless King doesn't have a name, does he? So instead of looking into the meaning of his name, let us instead think of what could potentially be his name. But before I go any further, I have to point out that much of this video will be operating under the assumption that the Nameless King is Gwyn's Firstborn. Whilst it isn't strictly confirmed as of time of writing, it is very likely and all evidence points towards that being the case. But let's start with his name, or lack thereof. Lord Gwyn's Firstborn, who inherited the sunlight, once wore this ancient ring. Boosts the strength of miracles. Lord Gwyn's Firstborn was a god of war, but his foolishness led to a loss of the annals and a rescinding of his deific status. Today, even his name is not known. First up, although this claims that his foolishness led to a loss of the annals, it seems far more likely that what the item is trying to say is his foolishness led to him being struck from the annals. His name was lost to the annals. He didn't physically lose the annals. This appears to simply be a mistranslation, and if you look at the Sunlight Medallion from the first game, it seems to support that theory. But with his name struck from all records, we can only wonder at what it might have been. Considering Gwyn's last-born is named Gwendolyn, and the one daughter we know of is called Guinevere, it seems fair that his firstborn would likewise have a Gwyn name, no? Gwyn itself is a Welsh name, I believe, meaning white, pure, blessed, and all that good stuff. So what would his firstborn be named? Gwynver? Gwyncus? Gwynson? Gwynson? We have no way of knowing, but personally I most like the names Gwynfor and Gwyn, the latter being Gwyn with an additional N. But of course there is nothing in any of the games that even hints at what his name could be, unless we look at Furarm. Armour worn by the Ferossa Lion Knights. The mighty Lion Knights, worshippers of the war god Furarm, wore heavy armour and were feared for their nimble two-handed swordplay. But their legacy was cut short with the fall of Ferossa. What do you think? Could his name be Furarm? What does Furarm itself even mean? Well, I was unable to find anything myself, but if there is a meaning, I'm sure somebody out there will know it. Incidentally, it does remind me, and always has reminded me of some reason, of Fujin, the wind god from Mortal Kombat. The Nameless King himself does have quite some association with the wind and the storms after all. But that's completely off topic. But there are some links here between Furarm and the Nameless King. Not only is Furarm a war god, but he is worshipped by Lion Knights, who are feared for their nimble two-handed swordplay. I'm not entirely sure if two-handed swordplay means one sword in each hand or two-handed greatswords. It would make more sense to me that it's supposed to refer to power stancing, because power stancing is a big thing in Dark Souls 2. But simply by looking at nimble two-handed swordplay, that would imply to me that it is one sword held in two hands. Either way, they don't have a particularly strong association with the Nameless King, who uses a sword spear, although Gwyn himself is rather nimble with his greatsword, I suppose. But let's ignore that for a moment and look at the other part. Lion Knights. Who is the original Lion Knight in Dark Souls? Ornstein, of course, the Leo Knight, and Ornstein has a strong connection with the Nameless King. So there are definitely some links between Furarm and the Nameless King. It's also worth noting that the Furarm helm has an engraving upon it of a knight and dragon, and the Nameless King certainly has a strong association with dragons after all. He spent a lifetime hunting dragons before joining with them. Now, there's no proof one way or the other, but personally I think Furarm is supposed to be the Nameless King, but Furarm is not his name. Rather, it is a name given to him by his worshippers. I suppose you could liken it to Mars and Ares. In some ways Mars is a reinterpretation of Ares, and I believe this is something similar. And that's just his name after all. Let's look at what else we know of Gwyn's Firstborn. And this would be a good time to highlight the reasons why many believe the Nameless King is Gwyn's Firstborn. Of the few items referencing him in the first game, we know that even his name is not known, and that he still looks closely over his Warriors of Sunlight. The boss is titled Nameless King or Nameless Lord in the Japanese version. Even his name is not known leads quite nicely into Nameless King. A dragon-hunting weapon from the Age of the Gods, the earliest form of the cross spear, serving as both a sword and a spear. Its owner was the Nameless King, a deific hunter of dragons. The sword spear is imbued with the lightning, of which he was the heir. From the Age of the Gods, Gwyn's age, imbued with the power of lightning, of which he was the heir. Gwyn was the Sunlight King, and sunlight in Dark Souls is typically represented with lightning. He is essentially the heir to sunlight. The Nameless King was once a dragon-slaying god of war before he sacrificed everything to ally himself with the ancient dragons. Again, we know that Gwyn's Firstborn was the old god of war. The Sunlight Medal in the first game explicitly mentions this. When the great beast fell, the king claimed his soul, as was the custom in the Age of the Gods. Once again, reference to the Age of the Gods. Whilst we didn't previously know that it was custom to claim souls, whether it be from enemies or allies in this sense, we can infer as much from Ornstein and Smo claiming each other's souls when one falls, to imbue themselves with additional power. Not to mention, the giant blacksmith will infuse boss souls to create powerful weapons, and he was the blacksmith who armed the gods. Then we have his armour to consider. This golden crown buried amidst long strands of bristling ash is said to closely resemble that of the First Lord. Indeed, it's a near identical match to Gwyn's crown from the first game. These golden bracelets, together with the golden breastplate and crown, are said to closely resemble those of the First Lord. Likewise, another connection with Gwyn. The First Lord, after all, has only ever referred to Gwyn. And outside of that, there's the fact that the boss physically resembles Gwyn, even down to being semi-hollowed, and also uses similar lightning-themed attacks, and his sword spear is a good enough match to the broken sunlight statues we've found since Dark Souls 1. All in all, there is a lot of very compelling evidence that the Nameless King is Gwyn's Firstborn. So much so that I would personally consider it confirmed at this point, but you never know. That's all well and good, but who is Gwyn's Firstborn? Why was he struck from the annals and stripped of his deific status? Dark Souls 3 answered that, because he sacrificed everything to join with the dragons. And when they say sacrificed everything, they might truly mean everything, because he's lost even his name. Indeed, when fought in the game, he is first encountered riding a magnificent storm dragon. And this was no mere pet, but more of an equal, a comrade. A friend? Perhaps. There is a strong bond there, at any rate. We know that the Nameless King is Gwyn's Firstborn, just as Gwendolyn is his lastborn, and we know that he spent a lifetime hunting dragons. Whereas we do not know if Gwendolyn ever fought against the dragons. It is entirely possible Gwendolyn was born during the Age of Fire. Seath the Scaleless betrayed his own, and at last the dragons were no more. So where does the Nameless King fit into all this? And this is where the heavy speculation begins. Something caused the Nameless King to side with the dragons to some extent, but what? Is it possible he realised some truth that Gwyn either chose to ignore or never discovered, in relation to the inevitable fading of the fire? After all, Gwyn and the other lords disrupted the very nature of the world by challenging the dragons. Is it possible the dragons were necessary in some way? They do seem to keep coming back after all, and the gods are susceptible and weak to the darkness that humans represent, whereas the dragons are not, so far as we're aware. Did the Nameless King realise this and claim that dragons were the only way to keep the dark at bay? And consider for a moment that he didn't subjugate his storm dragon by most accounts. The dragon willingly works with him, implying a level of intelligence and sentience we've rarely seen in the dragons of Dark Souls. Seath made a conscious choice to betray his kind, and the slumbering dragon Sin likewise seemed semi-conscious in how it was storing the poison of Shulva. And then there's the ancient dragon in Dark Souls 2 who, even if it's not a true ancient dragon, is capable of talking with us. And again in Dark Souls 2 we learned that dragons have memories. And all the way back in Dark Souls 1 we had the stone dragon of Ash Lake who is in some ways able to communicate with us as the player. So why did the Storm Drake side with the Nameless King? What was in it for him? It is entirely possible, of course, that the Nameless King betrayed his own for far more personal reasons. There are two important characters to consider here, after all. The bastard Priscilla and Yoshika. Priscilla of the Painted World is described as a crossbreed bastard, antithesis to all life. A crossbreed is self-explanatory. It means that her parents were of two different species, essentially. A bastard is a child born to unmarried parents. It could be a child born from an extramarital affair, or simply from those who were not wed. Priscilla has various dragon-esque features, primarily her eyes and scales. Many have speculated, myself included, that she was the result of Seath the Scaleless experimenting on Guinevere, for Seath has an obsession with immortality, which would likewise thematically suit an obsession with the goddess of fertility. It is only reasonable to assume that one who creates life would have the secrets to immortality. At least, if you're a dragon like Seath, it's reasonable. But what if Priscilla is instead the daughter of the Nameless King? What if Gwyn discovered this and saw no choice but to strike him from the annals and strip him of his status as god for this ultimate betrayal? And yet, Priscilla remains within Anor Londo, and it appears that Gwendolyn is fully aware of her presence, judging from the fact that Aldrich appears to have dreamt of Priscilla, although it could well be Yoshika, whilst consuming the Darkmoon god. Most clues point towards Priscilla, as this news comes from the Life Hunt Scythe miracle, which is of course strongly associated with Priscilla, and not Yoshika. Let us assume for a moment that Priscilla is the daughter of the Nameless King, and the reason for his banishment, and that Gwendolyn subsequently trapped Priscilla within the Painted World. What about Yoshika? What does this mean for the Nameless King and Velka? For the Painted World has a strong association with Velka, the goddess of sin, and many items that are deemed dangerous to the gods are present in the Painted World. Velka herself is a rogue deity, yet with considerable influence over the other gods. Could Yoshika be another daughter of the Nameless King? She is never described as a bastard or crossbreed, and she also seems to lack the fearsome Life Hunt ability. A sacred chime belonging to Yoshika. Her brother, the former Knight Captain, presented her with this medium together with another gift, her name. Whilst Yoshika herself claims Gwendolyn is her brother and Gwyn her father, it is easy to pass that off as one might refer to a priest as father. But that's an in-game item which is probably describing Gwendolyn as her brother, and the in-game items very rarely lie. Whilst it doesn't explicitly refer to Gwendolyn, it would make sense that he is the Knight Captain of the Darkmoon Blades, even if he's usually referred to as the Darkmoon God. But Gwendolyn, if it is truly he, also named Yoshika, and Yoshika even has her own church, so she's not exactly being hidden away in the same sense that Priscilla was. Is that because she lacks Life Hunt, which is antithesis to all life and obviously pretty dangerous to the gods? Indeed, in an early rendition of the first Dark Souls, Priscilla was supposed to be the heroine of the game. What that means we don't know, but it seems likely that she was going to be our Maiden in Black, our Emerald Herald, our Firekeeper, who levels us up. And that would make sense, because if she is the one who has Life Hunt, and we are the ones who are seeking out the gods to destroy them, it would only make sense that she levels us up using the power of her Life Hunt, allowing us, in turn, to defeat the gods. Which is In itself even more interesting once you consider the implications of Velka, who might well be the giant bird that carried us to Lordran. But whether through irony or coincidence, even Yoshika is trapped, this time by the Pontiff, Sullivan. She is also aware of dragons to some extent. She ponders if the player character is a dragon or perhaps a crow, the crow having association with Velka in some ways. But if she thinks we're a dragon, surely that would mean she has never seen one, implying she was born in the Age of Fire, and unless there's a retcon going on, she can't be Gwyn's daughter, because the first game explicitly refers to Gwendolyn as Gwyn's lastborn. Not his lastborn son, just his lastborn. And Yoshika herself treats Gwendolyn as her elder. She certainly thinks Gwendolyn is her brother, but is it possible that he lied to her? Is Gwendolyn the father? And Priscilla the mother? That would have very bizarre implications if true. But if she is a child of the Nameless King, what did he seek from creating these half-breeds? Life Hunt? Even the gods feared Priscilla's Life Hunt ability. What could he have planned with such a thing? Finally, what about Archdragon Peak, the temple of the Nameless King? We find it home to man-serpents and Drakeblood Knights, themselves a faction of knights who once invaded ancient Sholva, seeking to bathe in dragon's blood. Was Archdragon Peak once a temple and headquarters of the Sunlight Warriors? What would the Sunlight Warriors think if they knew that their Nameless King, their war god, now worked with dragons? Surely Archdragon Peak would be a sacred place to both Sunlight Warriors and those who seek to walk the path of the dragon. Is Archdragon Peak real? We can certainly see it off in the distance throughout many parts of the game, but when we actually reach it, it is through some strange form of meditation. Although we do hear a dragon, so maybe the dragon picks us up and carries us over there. And when we ring the great bell the Nameless King is summoned, what does that remind you of? Why, the Lords of Cinder themselves and the Unkindled are likewise called by the Bell of Awakening. Was the Nameless King likewise dead and we summoned him from his grave by ringing the bell? Or was it merely a test? Did he challenge those who sought him out? For we know at least one other character was seeking the Nameless King, Dragon Slayer Ornstein. Golden lion armor associated with Dragon Slayer Ornstein from the Age of Gods and imbued with the strength of lightning. In the Dragonless Age, this knight, who long guarded the ruined cathedral, left the land in search of the Nameless King. This seems to imply that Ornstein left Anor Londo and went in search of the Nameless King, and this could well mean that the Ornstein we fought in the first game was nothing more than an illusion, or that following his defeat at the hands of the Chosen Undead, he subsequently left Anor Londo. But why? Was he searching for the Nameless King out of vengeance, or a desire for his king to return to Anor Londo? We know that Ornstein was somewhat of a protege to the Nameless King. Ornstein was the first knight of the Sun's eldest born, and his cross spear is said to have pierced scales made of stone. He based the design on his spear on the Nameless King's sword spear, and just to go off on a quick tangent, in Star Wars, Anakin based the design of his lightsaber on Obi-Wan Kenobi's, his own master. I thought that was a funny parallel. Although it's quite often in these fantasy stories for an apprentice to base his design of a weapon or armour or crest or anything like that on the design of his master's. There is also the miracle Sacred Oath to consider. This is the tale of the Sun's firstborn, his faithful first knight, and the brave dragon slayer who served them both. There has been a bit of confusion in regards to this spell, but this is what I believe it means. This is the tale of the Nameless King, who is Gwyn's first knight, and Ornstein, who served both Gwyn and the Nameless King. Either way, we can find Ornstein's armour and spear in Archdragon Peak, but no body. Was Ornstein defeated by the Nameless King and then go down to Hade? Or did he merely relinquish his arms? Did Ornstein transform into the Stormdrake? Probably not. Why has such a powerful figure taken no interest in the affairs of the past generations though? Does the Nameless King know what has befallen Anor Londo? Would he have saved Gwendolyn had he known his brother's fate? Was he fighting another battle far away all this time? Was he dead all this time and we revived him with the bell? It is a pity. With strength such as that he possesses, imagine what could have been. Artorias might never have fallen to the abyss. New Londo never flooded, Anor Londo never ceased by Sullivan. Did he have a good reason for what he's done? Was he on the other side of the world in Ferosa near Drangleic? We may never know. But whether you think of the Nameless King as the ultimate traitor or a misunderstood hero, well, that is up to you.
The nice thing about weapons, they never betray you. So pay them a little respect, eh?